And welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. As always, joining me is my co-host, man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast, and the host of the Rockwell video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, you are my co-host and you are also a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. You're the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much, Roger, and thank you to you, viewers and listeners, for your amazing support. The numbers are going up on the downloads and the views on YouTube. We really appreciate it, and we also appreciate all the thank yous and well done messages that we get through the interweb. Roger, I took a look at the show notes. It's another packed session today, so let's begin with In the News.
Internet users in the UK have spent an extra day online per month so far in 2021, with a daily average of 6 hours and 26 minutes, according to research by 𝗬𝗏 and Hootsuite.
Well, Google My Business is finally rolling out a new feature allowing local businesses to see recent reviews on their Google Maps listing, but also to check the status of fake reviews they reported to Google.
Clubhouse recently launched a new Creator-First Accelerator program, which will provide financial support and expertise to 20 creators to help them build their audience and ultimately to monetize their Clubhouse efforts.
According to socialmediatoday.com, Facebook is working on new audio-only options for Rooms, which would enable you to create public or private audio group chats, but there's still no live dates though.
That's a Facebook Clubhouse then. Google recently announced that they are testing a new feature on YouTube that could create an automated list of products based on items detected within the video content published on the platform.
A new £50 banknote featuring mathematician and computer science pioneer Alan Turing will officially circulate on the 23rd of June, the date of Turing's birthday.
An appreciation of internal communications and a thirst for innovation are important characteristics marketers must possess in the post-pandemic world, according to marketingweek.com.
And finally, one for you, Roger. The new update for Microsoft Flight Simulator introduced in the UK and Ireland was released recently, but far more popular though was the addition of the trapped cargo ship, the Ever Given, on the Suez Canal.
Yeah, do you know, Pascal, it's so interesting that this piece of news appears here because I was talking to my son just the other day about Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, me and my son have been fans of this program all through its many iterations going back many, many years. But of course, this new version uses actual satellite photography to generate the scenery, and it genuinely is pretty much like flying over the actual world. Now, they didn't get it totally right. The first version, some of the scenery was a little bit wonky for Edinburgh, for example. Edinburgh Castle looked like an office block, which I thought was quite funny. They fixed it in this release that you've been talking about here in the news. But do you know what I have a problem with? Microsoft Flight Simulator, I think they've gone far too far in the extreme of making things realistic. It originally took me about 24 hours to download the original version of the program. Even this update took about 5 hours to download. When you hit the play button or the start button on Microsoft Flight Simulator, it takes about 14 minutes from clicking the icon to getting to the menu screen. And I've got a fairly high-end PC, and it is just so slow. And the problem is it's so realistic that mainly I'll set an aeroplane on the runway, I'll go down the runway, I'll lift off, and after about 5 seconds I've crashed and blown up. And I find it almost impossible to play. And I think that maybe what they've done is they've taken it too far in the realistic direction. So unless you are a genuine, honest to down-to-earth proper pilot, you won't be able to use it. They should have almost like had a version for people like me who just want to take off and fly over their home type thing. So yeah, and the Suez Canal thing, well, that's the current meme, isn't it? Putting the ever given in all these different scenarios.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, almost like all video again, there should be like a beginner's version, where you just want to try it out. And then you've got, the kind of veteran version where everything is almost impossible to pull together. But when I saw this news item, I couldn't help but smile. I said, well, I must add this just for you, Roger. Can I ask you your reaction as a vlogger about this idea of YouTube literally be able to automatically match what they can see on your video clips, Roger, to a product? So, for example, recently you re-released some of your vlogging in and around Eastern Europe. I know you've not obviously activated the advertising feature, but let's say, for argument's sake, that YouTube were to take over and override that. How would you feel as a content creator that your video suddenly has adverts for, I don't know, local, venues, maybe theaters or beer or food or anything like this?
It's an interesting one, Pascal, because as you say, I'm not monetized on YouTube yet. I'm creeping ever closer to the magic 1,000 subscribers. So anybody listening to the podcast fancies giving me a nudge towards that target, then please feel free to go onto YouTube and look for Roger Edwards TV and give me a subscribe. The problem is, I sort of said to myself, even if I get to the stage where I'm monetized, I'm not sure how far I want to take it, because I do find adverts, as you know, incredibly annoying. And the YouTube adverts seem to be more and more intrusive all the time now. Now, I used to be able to tolerate the 5-second ones at the start of a video that you can skip, whereas now there's sometimes 2 of them. And I think sometimes the adverts that appear in the middle of the videos, seem to come along every 10 seconds or so. And there's one particularly annoying one for a brand, and I'm sorry if this is not your brand's fault, probably. It's called Get Fresh or Go Fresh. They deliver food to your house. And it seems to me that you watch a video on YouTube and an advert for them just comes up like every minute or so. And I'm thinking, okay, just show me a different advert. Just don't show me the same one, for goodness sake. So if I get monetized, whilst I think this is a great idea, and obviously it will make advertising relevant for the content that you're showing, I just hope it doesn't go too far and annoys people to the extent that they start hitting that unsubscribe button.
Yeah, you want to avoid that. I mean, talk about vlogging, we talk about educational videos, all sort of content on YouTube. And just because, of course, Google's AI is now so clever, they can just see, a fraction of a second of an object or a car or like I said, a building of sort, and then can match it to an advert. I think you've got to be careful. I mean, I take your point. I watch a French news channel on YouTube. So usually they go live on national TV. Then 2 days later, it's a copy, if you will, of the video, the news item on YouTube. The number of adverts I've got to go through just to understand, a debate or conversation has become quite frustrating. And I know that they want us to push to go for the YouTube Premium, but I'm not there yet. I was pleased to see the news about Google Maps.
Yes.
And people allowed to say this is a fake review, please look into it, but also track the status of their query, because in the past, many of my customers reported to me that there was a fake review, that usually is negative, and they reported it, but they had no idea whether it had been successful, and they had no concept of how much longer do I have to wait. So I think this is a move in the right direction.
Yeah, it's interesting, Pascal, because as you know, I take an interest in reviews on Amazon at the moment because of my book. And I've been fortunate that I've had some nice reviews for my book on Amazon. But I came across a news report the other day where a particular individual, and I'm not going to name this individual because I don't want to give him or her any unnecessary publicity, has literally been putting 1-star reviews on pretty much any book he can find. And pretty much every review is the same. It just says this is a rubbish book, or this is a rubbish film, or whatever. And he gives them 1 star. It's the same person. And all of these people who've been hit by this 1-star review have complained to Amazon, and of course nothing's been done about it. So same as this, if a platform like Google and Amazon is going to give people the ability to do reviews, there has to be some way of checking that they're legitimate, and it's not just somebody spamming, their platforms in order to devalue somebody's content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, have a big marketing push asking people to get busy with their local SEO and local marketing using Google Maps, and then the other not have, systems to support them when they are victim really of malpractice.
And of course, the other thing that made me laugh today, I was reading an article about people reviewing restaurants. So this is slightly related. And there's one restaurateur in Leeds who's just fed up with all the people leaving silly reviews on TripAdvisor, and has actually started putting replies up and tweeting replies. For example, it's a Chinese restaurant, and apparently somebody wrote a review complaining that the salt and chili chicken was too salty. And when you think about it, that's pretty dumb, isn't it? And so the owner of the restaurant said, come on, if you order salt and chili chicken, you should sort of expect it to be salty. Don't give me a bad review for something that you actually ordered.
I know, and it kind of makes you wonder, who are those people leaving reviews like this? And I know that some of them are downright criminal activities. We are aware of that. We pretty much have said what we had to say about Clubhouse, Roger, in previous episodes, but I just wanted to kind of quickly mention Facebook. So this is like an updated news item. So a few weeks ago, we had allegedly Facebook was looking into audio social networking. We now know that it's a fact. They are doing it. But interestingly, they're using Rooms. So now Rooms was the video kind of chat function that was released during the early months of the lockdown, so nearly a year ago. I think it's logical that they should use that kind of feature. Rooms provides much better video connection and much better sound quality, so why not build on that? But I'm just perplexed about what would you want to strip out the video bits if Rooms is working fine as it is.
I agree, and way back we talked about Twitter rolling out that audio tweet feature, which they pulled or they postponed because actually they had no way of giving it subtitles for the hard of hearing. And that is still a major problem with Clubhouse, is that it is not available to everybody. And, yes, let's look at ways of giving, of rolling these audio type platforms out across the market if that's what people want, but let's also consider inclusion as well. And I know audio only app is, it's going to be, excluding some people. So I don't know what the solution is to that, Pascal, but there must be one.
Oh, there is one, and indeed we know that both Google and the bigger company Alphabet and Facebook have the ability now to transcribe really well and to great results. So I think they need to look into that, but I think you're absolutely right. I do wonder, I forgot to check before we sat down to record this, but normally every year there is a big conference. So you've got Google I/O, about 2-3 day conference, and Facebook F8. Now last year these conferences were cancelled. I'm not sure whether they're going to try and do virtual versions now that they've had more time to obviously plan those. And that would be a perfect kind of platform, to announce what they're going to do about audio and accessibility on that stage.
Yeah. No, it's definitely something that needs, even if something like Clubhouse had a delay, even though it's live, maybe it was 30 seconds delayed, so that some sort of translation system is going on in the background, putting subtitles up for when it actually hits the correct time. I don't know, but there needs to be something done, I think.
Yeah, let's keep looking at that. So, well, thanks very much for reacting to those bite-sized, bits of news. But let's slow things down and move on to the content spotlights. Now, in this segment, Roger and I surprise each other with a discovery from the interweb, an article, a podcast, a video. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Pascal, this is probably the shortest article I've ever chosen from a content spotlight. And normally I would choose articles or videos or podcasts that are a little bit more detailed. But when I talk you through this, you'll understand why I've chosen it. The headline of the article is 7 Marketing Rules You Should Never Break. And it's by a gentleman called Dave Wakeman. And it appears on the B2C, which is business to community, website. Now, as you know, Pascal, I have certain hobby horses about marketing. The fact that these days it's far too tactical and we never talk about strategy anymore, and complexity and all of that sort of thing. Well, this article grabbed my attention with its headline, as it was probably designed to do, even though I'm not usually a fan of the 7 things to do sort of titles. But as soon as I started to read this, I started to agree with each of the 7 things. And as it's the shortest article I've ever put up on the show, I thought I'd just go very, very quickly through these. And by the end of the article, we'll see whether you agree that it was just something that was just absolutely imperative for me to talk through. So, yeah, I mean, he just basically starts off by saying, man, there is so much bad marketing advice rolling out. Trying to keep up can give you a headache. And I'm not going to try and fight all the marketing BS that gets... I could have written this myself. It's just incredible. So number 1 is he's saying, don't discount. If you can, don't discount, because when you discount, it eats into your profits. Now, in fairness, he does quote a statistic, which I'm a bit dubious about. Like, he says that for every 1% you discount, you're going to knock your profits by 40%. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation between discounting and profit in every single product in every single industry, but I guess the thought is there. So you've always got to charge a price for your goods and services that covers your costs, and you shouldn't discount below that level. Number 2, segment based on behavior, and this is basically what he's saying is, for goodness sake, stop saying you're targeting millennials or you're targeting Gen Z, or for older customers you're targeting Gen X or baby boomers, because those are entire generations of people. And if you say that you're targeting millennials, then you're displaying that you don't understand marketing, and you don't understand segmentation, and you don't understand targeting. Because there will be millennials who like heavy metal music. There'll be millennials who like dubstep. There'll be millennials who like going on holiday to Miami. There'll be millennials who like going on holiday to Estonia. You've got to target your audience, segment it down, find the target you want to go after. And yes, they may be millennials, but what he's saying here is focus on things that collect them together in behaviours, likes and desires. Number 3, there is no such thing as a commodity. What he's saying here is that even if you're selling matchsticks, even if you're selling bottles of milk, there is still ways you can find to differentiate it from your competition, to make it stand out, whether it's in your targeting, whether it's in your messaging, whether it's in your packaging. Never think it's so commoditized that you can't do anything with it. Number 4, brand purpose costs money. Now, again, we've seen a lot of brands will hop onto social issues, won't they? Oh, we're supporting Black Lives Matter. We're supporting all of these global warming initiatives. But the fact is, and unfortunately, some brands just do that to get the PR. If you're serious about having a brand purpose that aligns with one of these global issues, then you've got to put your money behind it. Number 5, strategy before tactics. Again, what he's saying is do the research, work out who your customer is, do segmentation, do targeting, do positioning, work out what your product is. Do all of that first before you even start talking about social media content, advertising, whatever it is. Number 6, this is joyous. The 4 Ps are still alive. I'm going to actually just read this out. Every day some knucklehead wants to talk about how the 4 Ps are dead. Again, turn and run from these numpties. The 4 Ps are still around, and they aren't some formula. They are a framework to help you make sure you are considering the right decisions for your marketing mix. Product, price, place, promotion, they are all still totally relevant. And if you disagree with that, then you misunderstand one of the fundamentals of marketing. And number 7, positioning. Make sure that you have a position, an offer, which stands out and is different or better than those of your competitors. And that will give you something to pin all of your marketing communications on. So, Pascal, do you think I was right to choose that article?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like I should applaud, the author. It's so refreshing to hear someone with, almost the voice of reason in this kind of really white, noisy and chaotic world that has become, marketing and particularly digital marketing. And I think this is also interesting because I'm sensing a mood out there in the marketplace about people like, the author. Remember me of the name, sorry, again? The name of the author?
Dave Wakeman.
Yeah, so Dave and many others are becoming more and more vocal about their sheer frustration of the lack of logic, the lack of real wisdom out there, and people just moving from one tactic to the next, including hijacking social causes, which I think is despicable, particularly when it's irrelevant, or you're doing it because someone came up with a Twitter campaign that's going to last a fortnight. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. And interestingly, I think we're going to see more and more of articles of that type and podcasts and even videos.
Yeah, and this is just a little snippet. I was recently asked to write a controversial article for a website that we both know. I won't give it away because it's not been released yet, but the article is about why we should ditch the digital word. And I decided to get quite ruthless in that. And it's of a similar vein. So I'm quite looking forward to more of this sort of stuff.
Now, we've said it before to our viewers and listeners, we don't talk to each other, we don't consult in terms of what we're going to choose for the content spotlight. And yet, once again, there's been a meeting of minds because I have chosen a short form article, and I've chosen an article again about reason, logic, and wisdom. So the title of this article, which appeared on PR News, is "Should Your Brand Chase the Next New Thing on Social?" The article is a kind of interview format. So the interviewer is Erica Bradbury. She's the editorial director of PR News and Social Shakeup, and she's interviewed Tiffany Rivers, the director of social media for MediaCo's. And what is interesting is two things. A short form article which has high impact. I think it's a lesson in that. So I wanted people to know that it is possible to create something that makes you think, makes you talk about, as we're going to do in a moment, but also something that has structure. So what Erica's done really well is creating the context of why she's writing this interview style article, and of course who she's addressing. Now, Social Shakeup have an event called the Virtual Spring Tune-Up. So this is actually interviewing one of the speakers at the event. So a nice, kind of before promotion of the event using content marketing. Why wouldn't you do that? But also, because she's using interview style where there's a leading question, then there's an answer from Tiffany Rivers, it flows naturally. You can jump from different questions. It's just very well structured and looks elegant on a blog post. So I won't spoil, obviously, the short form article by reading out all the question and answers, but I picked one question, Roger, which I think says it all in terms of this article, but also, once again, the mood of the time about this idea of being sensible and more reasonable in terms of how we spend our time. So the question that Erica asked of Tiffany is as follows. At what point would you advise a client to avoid jumping on the bandwagon of the latest shiny object? And I don't just mean Clubhouse, clearly, but that's going to be the way in which my mind goes. Now, what is interesting is, to me, once again, this is a kind of conversation you and I've had for decades now, and it keeps coming back over and over again. And I think what I'm getting from Tiffany, or I'm getting from your selection, is that maybe those who are a little wiser, a bit more sensible, a bit more logical, we perhaps need to also be more visible with our views, because our lovely clients, all those kind of small business owners out there, non-marketers, could easily be swayed by those who perhaps see the world very differently, hacks, tactics and the like. So she's giving obviously a reply, three fronts really. The first one is, my reaction would be capacity, or what she called bandwidth. Frankly, do you have the time to dedicate to yet another social media platform or app? Truthfully, have you really taken full advantage of the current platforms you are running? Question number one. Question number two, do you have enough content in your pipeline? Is your content marketing system, and more importantly, backup systems as well, in place to sustain yet another shiny object? And frankly, are you quite honest with yourself? Is your audience on that platforms, and even if they are they sufficiently active on the platform to justify the additional kind of pressure on your resources, time, budget, and people? And there's more of that, in this article. But I just thought, yes, we need to hear that more often, more loudly, at a time where people are easily swayed by the tactics and the hacks.
This is just great. I mean, once again, yeah, I agree with you. You've picked something of a similar vein, and it warms my heart, Pascal, that maybe finally we're starting to see, people cottoning on to what we've been saying for all these years. And yes, the next section of this podcast is all about marketing tech and apps. And of course, you and I do get excited about new tech and apps all the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we should get excited about new technology. But you only use it if your customers need it, or if it's where your customers are hanging out. And it's the same with Clubhouse. It'll be the same with the next one that comes along. If your customers are there, then it may be worth checking it out. I agree with you as well. It shouldn't be a priority if you're not using all the other things that your customers are hanging out on as well. But if they're definitely not going to be there, then leave it for now. It's not a priority. It is just a shiny toy. So yeah, great that we're seeing more stuff like this.
No, I agree, and I think we're going to see more of that sensible, but also a bit braver, a bit more bullish, saying we need to shock people into realizing that they are just chasing this dream of somewhere out there. There must be an app that can do all this for me and make me, money without having to put the work in. And
yeah.
I would like to think that people like you and I and people before us, we spent decades proving that it doesn't exist. It's just the hard graft. It's the connection with the audience, understanding their behavior, and the genuine passion, which is almost like an obsession with customer service.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So, Dave Wakeman and Erica, thank you so much for your support in these arguments.
Super. Well, you mentioned it a moment ago. Let's get into marketing tech and apps. And in this section of the show, Roger and I share our recommendations about apps and solutions that can make life easier as a content creator and marketer. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Okay, Pascal, so I mentioned earlier that I'd recently written an article, which is the first article I've written for a while. I've been concentrating mainly on podcasting and video, as you know. And I've got a couple of other ones that are coming up over the next few weeks as well. So I started, as you would expect, got Word for Windows booted up, started typing. And I sort of have a love-hate relationship with Word for Windows. And as you know, when I was writing my book, a vast part of my book, the vast majority of my book, I actually dictated into my phone using the record feature on the Notes app on my iPhone. Sometimes I've been known to fire up Word for Windows and then to actually turn my screen off. So I'm actually typing and I can't see what's on the screen. So it's just blackness. And basically what I'll do is I'll type, and I don't care if I'm knowingly making mistakes. There's no punctuation or anything like that, simply because I don't want to be distracted. And I do find that something like Word for Windows, with all its millions of options and the things that pop up, just gets in the way. Now, I came across this alternative. It's not really an alternative to Word for Windows. It's just an alternative way to write, but it's called Calmly Writer. And it's a website, and if you fire it up, the browser, it literally makes your screen like a great big piece of paper. There's no menu bar, there's no buttons, there's no drop downs, there's no clicks, there's no right click, left click, and all that. All it is effectively a blank sheet of paper. So not going to the extreme of turning off the screen so I can't see what I'm typing, but just the words. And no editing buttons to distract you or anything like that. Now, I can't say I've given it a massive trial. I've messed around with it for half an hour or so, just jotting a few ideas. And it is surprisingly calm. And maybe it is, going back to what we were saying before, I get distracted by shiny toys. But I think that using something like this for a first draft actually is quite a nice idea. And actually what you can do is you can use your mouse button to activate a series of menus that do come up, but you have to physically make them appear, as opposed to with Word for Windows, they're just there inviting you to click on them all the time. So if you do have trouble being distracted when typing, and one of the things I always do as I'm typing in Word for Windows, I'm sure you do it as well, is I'll type a sentence and then think, oh no, don't like that, I'll go back and edit it. You should never do that. You should just write your draft and then edit once you've finished. And I think that blank screen without all the temptation is just so much more conducive to that first draft.
Really clever.
So check it out.
Yeah, really clever.
Yeah, check it out, 𝗓𝗄𝗄𝗏. And on a related theme, one of the things within Word for Windows that I do use sometimes is the thesaurus function or the synonym function. You know, there are certain words that we always use. It's a beautiful day. You know, it was a delicious meal. And sometimes, you know, you're typing, it's a beautiful day, and you think, oh, come on, how else can I say it's a beautiful day? And yes, you can go into the synonyms function on Word, and it'll give you a list of alternatives, but it's just very functional. I came across completely by accident this other website. It's called RhymeZone, spelt RHYME zone, ZONE.com, and it effectively plugs itself as a website for finding rhymes, synonyms, adjectives, and more. Now, effectively, it's doing the same job as that quite sterile functionality in Word for Windows, but it's got a lovely interface, and it comes up with an astonishing array of alternatives that you wouldn't have thought of, massively different synonyms. The adjectives function is quite interesting. I think it was Stephen King who said the road to hell is paved with adjectives, or was it adverbs? But this website will steer you in the right direction. And I actually started playing with it a few days ago, preparing for this, and it's actually more of a rabbit hole than you would think. You know, I actually genuinely started with "It's a beautiful day," and literally had hundreds of different ways of expressing that sort of thing. I was actually quite surprised how addictive it was. So yeah, once again, I managed to turn something quite mundane into something quite interesting just by looking for a few interesting new apps.
But you know, ultimately what we're trying to do here is also make the practice that is content creation and marketing more enjoyable, but also by connecting with our voice as authors, more than just, again, an app that can kind of help you get there quicker without necessarily growing your skills and actually enjoyment. So I found those two choices inspired. Well done, Roger.
Thank you.
So for me, I went for two options today to do with music and creating, again, an experience when someone listening to a podcast or indeed watching a video where the music is actually part of what you wanted to create as an experience, an immersive experience. And this was born out of two things. One, conversation with clients. I've had the pleasure, as you know, for the last few years to coach people on video marketing, but also using visual storytelling as part of, you know, the skill set that they grow over time. But also I watched the BBC series called The Planets with Professor Brian. Is it Brian Cox? Is his first name? Yeah. I always worry that I'm going to mention him as the actor Brian Cox, but there's also this wonderful raconteur and obviously very talented guy that is Professor Brian Cox. And I'm only halfway through. And not only is it visually stunning, not only his kind of efforts in making something quite complex easy to understand and actually very, very enjoyable, but the music is outstanding. And that got me thinking really about my advice to people about, you know, how they choose the music for their vlogging, for their video case studies, for their podcast, for their, you know, anything to do with where there's a series in there, where you need to make sure that the music you've chosen kind of hangs it together as a series. There's almost like a leitmotif where it comes back and people can detect that there was an effort in the selection of the music. So two options for you if you want to really start to create a musical experience as well as a visual and oral one through the spoken word, you've got, of course, and we must remind people that YouTube has its own copyright-free library of music, and the hyperlink will be in the show notes below. But this is really quite a vast library of tracks, from very short to much longer, and you can filter and search, using different keywords and fields. So that's, I think, a very, very starting point, which you can add to the many other options that you've mentioned yourself, Roger. But the other thing I was thinking is it maybe time for many of us to start to be seen to be working in partnership with a music composer, perhaps someone that you know already, that could be part of your circles, or someone that, of course, whose work you can find on the web. And this is where 𝗏𝗏 came back to mind. Now, 𝗏𝗏, no relation to, obviously, a famous McLeod that we spoke about in the recent episode of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast, but 𝗏𝗏 is an American music composer who's been creating now over 2,000 pieces of music, all royalty-free, and it's been used by indie filmmakers, documentary makers, game producers, and more for quite some time now. And his talent as a music composer and creator is truly outstanding. And what is nice by, forgive me, adopting a music composer like 𝗏𝗏, you're going to have continuity in the style. So very much the way which, forgive me, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg have used John Williams, very much in the way in which, other directors will have their go-to music composer. Why don't you follow the same kind of logic by either picking a composer from the YouTube music library or adopting, inverted commas, someone like 𝗏𝗏?
Do you know, this is such a coincidence, Pascal, because, the YouTube music library is phenomenal. And, in the early days of Rogvlog, I used to use that almost exclusively. I sort of use it from time to time now, because the only downside of the YouTube library is that there are certain tracks which lots of people have used, and that's in the YouTube library. And I do use Epidemic Sound these days, which I've talked about on the show before. But interestingly enough, there are 𝗏𝗏 tracks in the YouTube library.
Right, yeah.
And I've used a few of his tracks because some of his music is sort of, it is rock music, but it's sort of, sort of 80s, 90s U2 style rock music. So I have used some 𝗏𝗏 tracks in my early Rogvlogs, but I'm pretty sure they came from the YouTube library. So it'll be interesting to go along and actually see his actual library and see what's on there.
And in the case of, again, a music composer like 𝗏𝗏, you have such a range of options. But think of it, he's been used by filmmakers, documentary makers, and game producers. There's got to be a reason for that. So
Absolutely.
Have a look, because I think for you to then produce an issue series where you will name the music composer and that name keeps coming back over and over again, that can only but create credibility for your brand and for your work.
Absolutely right.
So, well, Roger, as I've said before, all this was only made possible thanks to pioneers and inventors from the distant and recent past. It is time to move on to This Week in History.
In 1896, the Olympic Games are reborn in Athens. 1,005 years after being banned, 280 participants from 13 nations competed in 43 events, including tourists who were allowed to sign up on the day.
Well, in 1906, the first ever animated film is released, named Humorous Faces of Funny Faces. This is a 3-minute silent short created by British-American film pioneer J. Stuart Blackton.
In 1935, Scottish physicist Sir Robert Watson Wyatt is granted a patent for the radar, radio detection and ranging system, based on his earlier work on radio wave detection of thunderstorms.
In 1953, the American magazine TV Guide is published by Triangle Publication, with other 1.5 million copies sold in 10 cities. By the 1960s, it became the most widely read magazine in the country.
In 1960, the epic movie Ben-Hur wins 11 of the 12 Academy Awards. It was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and the famous chariot race scene alone took 3 weeks to shoot and used over 15,000 extras.
Wow. Well, in 1973, inventor Martin Cooper makes a call on a New York street using the first portable telephone. His invention was 10 inches in height, 3 inches deep, and 1.5 inches wide, and weighed nearly 2 pounds.
In 1992, Microsoft Corporation releases Windows 3.1, replacing the previous DOS command line interface and adding multimedia extensions, scalable fonts, and the famous Control-Alt-Delete option.
And in 2010, the first generation iPad is released in the US. Steve Jobs had announced its development at a press conference in January 2010, and 300,000 iPads were sold in the first day.
My goodness, is it nearly 10 years since the first iPad? I resisted buying an iPad for the first year, not because I didn't think the thing was amazing, it's just that I decided that I wanted the second version rather than the first version, because I just had it in my head that the first version just wouldn't be as good, and I had an iPhone anyway, and an iPod Touch in those days, which was like a tiny iPad, so I did resist it. And then, of course, when the iPad 2 came out a year later, it took me ages to track one down because they were so popular, it was difficult to find one to buy.
It is something that this brand has achieved, the sense of event each time there's a new release, but also element of scarcity. I mean, 300,000 iPads sold in one day, that's a big amount. I mean, even to today's kind of scales. But I couldn't help but, laugh at the reference to the Control-Alt-Delete option. I must have not used it for quite some time, but back in the days of the early computers, once you and I were faced with the blue screen of doom, there was no other option but to kind of force crash the machine with the Control-Alt-Delete.
Of course, you can still use Control-Alt-Delete just to call up the one of the subscreens, and I often use that just to get to the control panel in Windows. But why was there never a Windows 3.0? They just launched 3.1. So was there a 3.0 that just was never put into the public domain? Yeah,
maybe there was a beta version for just for some of the kind of focus groups. But it's kind of good to remind ourselves that in 1992 we got excited because we have what's called on the news item scalable fonts. That is to say, you and I could choose between Arial 10 or Arial 20, which suggests that before 92 you couldn't.
Yes, I mean, I just can't imagine what that was like, but like a typewriter, I guess, you couldn't change the size of your font on the typewriter. So it may make an appearance in the film marketing section of this podcast one day, because Ben-Hur genuinely is one of those just epic all-time movies that just everybody, even if they've not seen it, they know about it. And that chariot race was, to say that it's so old in terms of how long ago it was that they made it. If you watch it today, we talked about the Mad Max film recently and all the technology and the wagons that they used in that, but that chariot race in Ben-Hur was as good as some of the scenes in a modern movie like Mad Max, and hats off to them doing it with the technology they had to hand.
Absolutely, and I mean, this is a movie that is on TV, of course, every Christmas in the UK and most of the world, I'd imagine. And once again, it's one where back in the days in the 60s and 70s, people took time with the story. I don't think you could get away with that kind of production nowadays. Things have to move on much faster. But it's back to this idea of scale, and I think in a movie like this, you literally went to see it on the big screen because of the scale. And you can cheat that. That's why you have to have 50,000 extras, which is kind of the mind boggles, because you can add, you can do what they do nowadays, which is to have 1,000 and then just do copy and paste on the computer screen and add, the 14,000 that are missing.
Absolutely. And again, it's probably one of those films that it's got a load of iconic scenes in it. I mean, there's another famous scene where they're in ships and they're ramming each other, and there's somebody drumming to get them to row faster. And that's really quite exciting as well. But I have to say, I think it's possibly one of those films which, if you were to strip those scenes out, the rest of it is probably a little bit dull. I don't know. Maybe the memory is cheating me a bit here. But I think I've always watched Ben-Hur and thought, oh, let's get to the chariot race, shall we? Or shall we get to the ship scene, or whatever it is, that the bit at the end with the crucifixion of Christ, or whatever it was. But I do think it's one of those films which is very, very long, but worth it because of all the showpieces that they had in it.
Yeah, you're right. It almost feels like you have to go through the acting bit of long
Yes.
dialogues in between. But that's the case for most of those productions of the time, including The King and I, which we spoke about at the recent This Week in History. So I must confess, although I was very pleased that I could add the reference to the Olympic Games starting again in 1896, thanks to the Frenchman Pierre de Coubertin, I had no idea they'd been banned for so long. I must have missed that bit. I just thought it just became a thing where the International Olympic Committee came to existence thanks to his work. But I had no idea that there'd been no games for so long, and the fact that, frankly, it was so open that you could just turn up in your flip-flops as a tourist and take part.
Absolutely, yeah. So doing a 100-meter sprint in your flip-flops. I'd be interested to know why they were banned for so long, but maybe the answer to that will lie within Google somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But so again, some wonderful, wonderful items of history, which remind us, the reason we're here is because of events that have happened in the past, and some of it, a long time ago. So, here we are, 1906, with the first ever animated film. And then fast forward to where we are today, where a moment ago I was talking about someone can grab their phone and make their own film and put some amazing music to it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Right. Well, listen, shall we go back into the present and move on to our creator shout-outs?
Let's do it.
Now, in this segment, Roger and I celebrate the work of content creators out there creating immense value for their community. So, Roger, who is in the spotlight today?
Okay, Pascal, this is a little bit different this week, and there's a reason why I'm doing this creator shout-out. I guess you would think that because this is Two Geeks in a Marketing podcast, that all of our content creator shout-outs should be people who are doing marketing-y type things or businessy type things. But I wanted to give this guy, Scott Bickerton, a shout out today. Now, he runs a club which is called the Pleasure Beach Experience. Now, for those of you who know me, I was born and raised in Blackpool. And in Blackpool, there's a very, very famous theme park called Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which is almost like an open-air museum of roller coasters and roundabouts and rides going back to 1896. It's a remarkable open-air museum. And, of course, they've got some extremely up-to-date modern attractions as well. Now, Scott runs this club. Effectively, it's a fan site, a fan club for Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but he also does a lot of vlogs, and I'm using Scott this week as a shout out to dispute one of the claims that a lot of marketing gurus, and I use my air quotes there for people who are not watching the video version of the podcast, that videos have to be short in order to get people's attention and to keep people's attention. Now, I've never subscribed to that point of view. People say, oh, if you're doing a marketing video, it can only be 90 seconds or it's got to be between 2 minutes and 3 minutes. My view has always been, if a video's good, then people will watch it all the way through. That's why people watched 6 series of Game of Thrones or 8 series of Games of Thrones or Breaking Bad or whatever it is. If the content is good, people will watch it. Now, there's a whole subgenre in the UK and beyond and throughout the world. There's a subgenre of video on YouTube dedicated to people who like going to theme parks. And their videos are often an hour and a half long, Pascal. And these people have got hundreds of thousands of subscribers. In some cases, they've got millions of subscribers. And some of these videos have hundreds and thousands of views. The sort of views that I would absolutely dream of having for my 2 or 3 minute marketing videos. And it just proves that if you've got an audience and if you produce great content, then it will be successful. And that disproves the rule. Now, I probably wouldn't even have thought of bringing this up on Two Geeks, but over the weekend, I had my first COVID jab. I was expecting to feel a little bit rough. Fortunately, I wasn't. The weather was a bit ropey, though. It wasn't very nice. There was a lot of wind. It was quite cold. And up pops this new video from Pleasure Beach Experience. And it was actually a video they'd shot last summer in 𝗖𝗵𝗲 in Tenerife, which is a water park. Now, I went to 𝗖𝗵𝗲 the last time, I think in 2016. And it is remarkable. It is such good fun. It's the sort of place that everybody goes to. You just become a child for the day. The theming is incredible. You know, you would think you were in old Siam. Funnily linked there to the King and I, of course. And the rides, the water rides, are just unbelievable. And this is a 20-minute video, basically with some POV shots of these rides. Beautiful sunlight, beautiful scenery. And over the weekend, I watched this, and it just made me feel I just want to get on a plane to Tenerife. And in fact, I'll go today. I'll go tomorrow. If I could, I will go to Tenerife and go to 𝗖𝗵𝗲. That was the power of Scott's video on that particular day. So, you know, again, let's use that as a lesson. Content, if it's good, there are no rules. Doesn't have to be short, doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be medium size. It just has to be good.
Smashing, wonderful selection, Roger. For me, again, with similar motivations, as you'll hear in a moment, is I want to give a shout out to Vicky and Mark Smith. Now, Vicky and Mark Smith are the director of Taylor Fit Therapy, which is a wellness center and a physiotherapy center that is near actually me in Durham, a place called Langley Park. And the idea of two people passionate about what they do launching a new podcast series is just so compelling. Now, to begin with, people will know of obviously Vicky and Mark because they have renovated an old Baptist chapel, and they've been documenting the renovation project and sharing pictures on social media and so on. So they kind of build a bit of an audience in that way, because of course people couldn't wait to see the project progression, but also when it was finished and so on. But a few months ago, I kind of encourage Vicky to go ahead and share more of knowledge of physiotherapy and the benefits of obviously looking after yourself. So she's launched with Mark a podcast series called Tailored Talks, and the latest episode is called What's the Point of Acupuncture? And the reason why I chose this, shout out Vicky and Mark, is because, like, I wanted to make a point that you don't have to work in marketing, you don't have to know a great deal about content production to create engaging content. And listening to Vicky and Mark as a couple talking about acupuncture and having fun with it, but also keeping it very simple. They even made links to film, which would always hit the mark for me. And for 10 minutes, you just listen to them. There's a bit of music in the background that makes it very enjoyable, and it's just so simple that, frankly, don't listen to Roger and I, don't listen to the marketing expert. Listen to Vicky and Mark, because this is what it takes to launch a podcast: to know your subject, love your customers, love what you do, and just talk about your favorite subject and find a format that works for you. And in this case, for them, I honestly, it was so natural, Roger. I wonder whether they knew they were being recorded. It was that natural and that great in terms of how it came across. So I wanted to give him a shout out, not only because well done for launching the podcast, but also you don't have to work in marketing to do content marketing.
Again, the parallels between what you and I have chosen to talk about today are uncanny, because, we've got a theme park guy creating great videos through an obvious passion for theme parks, and you've got a couple of people here creating incredible content through a passion that they have for physio and acupuncture and that sort of thing. And again, it is just, I think sometimes, we do this podcast because we have a massive passion for marketing. It's the same thing, isn't it? But I think that it's such a good point to remind ourselves of, that it doesn't matter what the subject is. If you've got that absolute passion for it and the desire to create content, then inevitably it's going to get an audience.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for the reminder, Roger. Now, We have come to the point of the show where we need to grab a drink, grab a popcorn, dim the lights. It's film marketing. So, Roger, let me take you back to 2012 when a group of film production companies got together and promised us the most chilling ghost story of our time. I'm talking, and you and I are going to review and talk about The Woman in Black.
Yeah, the most chilling ghost story of our time. Maybe of our time, probably not of all time. I think we've reviewed a few ghost stories here on Two Geeks which might claim that accolade. But it's a while since I watched this film, Pascal, so I specifically watched it last night in preparation for this episode, and I think it is pretty damn chilling. It is definitely atmospheric. It has definitely got a couple of mega jump scares in it. Both me and my wife, even, it's probably the third time we've watched it, jumped out of our seats again, at least twice, maybe 3 times, whilst rewatching it last night. And it does one of those things that I just absolutely love in these sort of ghost period pieces, in that you sometimes have to take your eye off the actor and the character and watch what's happening in the background of the scene, to see doors opening, or to see shadows flitting across mirrors, or to see dolls turning their heads. And if you go into it with that sort of mindset, you know, these films do bear multiple watches, because you can genuinely see all these things going on. So yeah, I watched it again last night, and we deliberately waited until it got a bit darker, because the clocks changed on Sunday, so it was a bit of a lighter evening. And as it got dark, I actually sat there thinking, you know, this is actually pretty good. I think that it probably is one of the most chilling ghost stories of our time.
I would agree. I've seen this movie several times now. I mean, as soon as the DVD Blu-ray was out, I bought it. So we went to watch it at the cinema with Denise, and I jumped and was essentially tense all the way through, because it was so superbly crafted. And also, what was interesting for me, and I wanted to spend a moment to say, I was a bit nervous about Daniel Radcliffe. I was nervous about whether me, as a film goer and watcher, could get past the Harry Potter thing. But of course, within moments, I forgot all about Harry Potter, because frankly, Daniel Radcliffe is an accomplished actor. And as we've seen since then, he's done, other movies. But for me, the reason I went to see it is, of course, because I was excited about the potential return to form of Hammer Film Productions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just before I talk about Hammer, I'll acknowledge Daniel Radcliffe. It was a great performance. I mean, there is a scene in the middle of the film, and just to give a quick background, he plays a character called 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He travels to a isolated manor house to do some paperwork for a deceased family, and it's one of those scary English remote country towns, with villagers who are all suspicious, and scary pub landlords and scary butchers and stuff like that. And there's one scene in it, Pascal, where he's exploring or trying to find his way around this manor house at night. He's on its own, and I wish I'd actually timed it, but I reckon it must have been about 25 minutes long of him searching through this house with the jump scares, with all those things going on in the background. And because it's just him, there's no dialogue, and it's genuinely scary, genuinely suspenseful. And part of that is because of all he has is his expressions. There's no dialogue at all. It's just his expressions. And that is the sign of a good actor. And yeah, this was the return of Hammer, wasn't it? The 1960s, very much revered horror series of films, which brought us Dracula, The Mummy, Frankenstein, made massive, massive stars out of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and people like that. And I think they've managed to capture some of the gothicness and the mood, the darkness of those 1960s Hammer productions, but obviously brought them up to date with modern techniques and modern filmmaking and modern effects.
And I think it was really quite clever. Now, I've not read the book, I must confess. I've seen the play, which I will share in a moment. But I thought, just this thing of happening, taking place in 1889, the traveling into, horse-drawn carriages, all the symbols of all the films I've enjoyed or certainly enjoyed or got scared by, watching the horror movies. So, of course, other companies such as Alliance, Cross Creek, and the UK Film Council got behind it. So this is a British production. It took place using natural venues in the UK, but also sets. And again, the choice of the costumes, of the set designs, the music again, and all those creating this atmosphere. And of course, for those of you who've not seen it, we're not going to tell you what happens at the end. But needless to say, the curse of the woman in black, going to a place called 𝗘𝗓𝗄𝗃, house. I mean, just a name. I'm saying, it's okay. I'll take another job if I was 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗡𝗃. But what was interesting doing the research for film marketing, I did not know, but actually when the movie was submitted to the British Board of Film Council, the BBFC, and they have to be rated, they had to actually take some scenes out and reduce some of the music because it was deemed to be too scary or been given a greater rating.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So is the uncut version the version that's on the DVD and Blu-ray?
I don't think so, because
never been released?
That's still a 12 or 12A, and there is a version that would have been a 15. And people thought, no, if it's a 15, what's like with the financiers, they worry that people are not going to go and see it. So I think that there's other scenes that were deemed to be just a little too scary. And indeed, the many claims to fame of the film, not only is it one of the biggest, and highest grossing horror film for Hammer Film Production of some time, but also the most complained about films in 2012 because it was too scary. That's a good bit of PR, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We complain because the movie is too scary to the BBFC.
Yeah, no, I mean, genuinely was jump scares, and as I say, all those funny little things going on in the background, faces in windows, shadows going across mirrors. I mean, sometimes I think, wow, that was very clever how they managed to do that. I'm sure I didn't see that the first time that I watched it.
There is a scene, which hopefully I'm not revealing too much, when he's asleep at the kitchen table. Do you know the one?
Yes.
At the cinema, you could hear people just wincing and almost trying to say to, Daniel Radcliffe, that 𝗧𝗵𝗲, please wake up because there's something behind you that, in a way, perhaps you don't want to see, but you can't stay asleep. And it was just so well. It was almost, playing to all our fears, going around this derelict ancient building with just a candle, which could essentially be extinguished at no time by a draft. And just to land, it was the marshy land, but also, of course, the curse of the locals, saying to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, you're going to cause trouble here. We don't want you around. We don't want you snooping around, this house and so on.
And one of the things that really struck me when I was watching it is, and this motif appears in lots of scary movies and ghost stories in particular, and that is old-fashioned toys and dolls.
Oh yeah, what is it about those things? Honestly,
I know. I mean, you've got the old-fashioned dolls with the eyes that go up and down. There's always some sort of monkey bashing symbols together.
They need to stop that.
And you just think, I wonder whether back in the old days when those were genuinely toys for kids, whether the kids of the time were just scared crapless by these toys that they had, or whether it's the fact that we now look back on toys like that and we've made them scary. But in fact, in those days, those toys were just absolutely joyous and cute and cuddly, and the kids loved them. That's something that's always interested me.
Likewise, I always think whether, those kind of mechanical toys or automaton, I think they were called, there was something just weird for the people because they came alive for a moment in time. But 1889, the maybe the early days of electricity, the early days of, obviously, some of the, record players and so on. So maybe technology was kind of creeping into people's lives and it was just unsettling for them and deemed to be just unpleasant. But there's always, a monkey playing the symbols that in those horror movies. And it's just almost like as soon as you see one, you go, oh, here we go. It's going to start to play without, being essentially, touched by anyone. So, interestingly, there are always critics, aren't they, Roger? We mentioned this actually before sitting down to record a film marketing, but people say, oh, well, it's by the book. It's almost like someone walked around with a clipboard and a checklist, and please do that, because that's what ghost stories have. Well, I don't have a problem with this. If you're going to make the most chilling ghost story of all time, you're going to put everything in there to make it obviously something that not only we've talked about nearly 10 years later, but also won all the awards, and to this day is deemed to be the most successful ghost story of all times.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly approve of it.
So, sorry, Roger.
Yeah, there was a TV series recently called The Haunting of Hill House, which has quite a lot of similar tropes and motifs in there. So I'm a big fan of this genre.
Absolutely. Shall we talk about marketing?
Yeah.
So, number one, what I liked about it was, the tagline. What makes things complicated? The tagline was a question which was addressing the audience and almost suggesting you might, after watching The Woman in Black, do you believe in ghosts? ? Was the tagline, which I think is inspired.
Yeah, I mean, you can have an entire conversation in the pub around that question, can't you? And most people would have a very animated conversation. So that's a joyous tagline because it creates interactivity, doesn't it? Straight away. Absolutely love that. And they must have had one of the first Facebook pages ever created for a film as well, I guess. Well, about 2010.
You and I have always been rather critical of the lack of, social media activities, or sometimes doing just the essentials, but not actually being particularly inventive. And what I will say is that on this occasion, and you're going to help us remind ourselves of the many activities on social media, but this is a movie and a team that has gone behind social media properly. So yes, they launched the page in July 2010, which is essentially during pre-production. Mm-hmm. And releasing a few, snippets as you would, and kind of letting people know about what was happening. But really, it came, it started to come alive, leading up to the release of the movie in the spring of 2012. And from there, I think we've got really quite a informative and inspirational teaser campaign and social media campaign, if you don't mind going through some of the items with us.
Yeah, I mean, there was the usual trailer, a cinema trailer, and teaser posters and stuff like that. But starting in February 2012, we had 3 featurettes on they had a YouTube channel. So they were talking to the cast and crew, retelling a classic ghost story, behind the scenes, making of the film, that sort of thing. There was a competition on Twitter. I mean, Twitter was only launched in 2006, wasn't it? So this was, 6 years into Twitter, but still not that many campaigns revolved around social media at the time. But the competition was for a chance to win limited edition Hammer film posters. There was other interviews that you could interact with. James Watkins, the writer, Jane Goldman, and Daniel Radcliffe, of course. And they started building all of this stuff. Daniel Radcliffe took over Glamour magazine's Twitter feed, for example, which I thought was quite interesting. In March, there was more teasers. Did The Woman in Black make you scream? Download Hammer Film's Scream app to record some more. Scream app. Give us your thoughts on Woman in Black in one sentence. See how the original strapline, Do You Believe in Ghosts, was interactive. There's a real thread running through this about how interactive it was. Before the film, they were teasing you. After the film, they were saying, did it make you scream? What were your thoughts in one sentence? In May, again, there was the ability to tweet questions to Daniel and get him to reply to you.
Wow.
And can you tell us what happened in the next scene? This went on for months. June 2012, he's running a ghost story competition on YouTube that Daniel's involved with as well. And this carried on all the way through to the end of June, when they released the DVD and the Blu-ray. So, yeah, there's been a few films recently which have been a little bit further in the past, and therefore the marketing was probably limited to traditional posters and traditional film trailers, but this one was super interactive. I love the interactiveness of this. It really did suck you in.
I think that's why I was so pleased you reminded us, because this is where film marketing as a segment of the podcast worked for me, because it's a source of inspiration, thinking, so what have I done pre-production to let the audience know that it's coming? What am I doing once it's been released, and how am I keeping the conversation going for weeks and months? Now I accept that someone writing a blog post or doing a vlog video won't have the impact and reach of the Woman in Black, but I think the principles and the idea of once you've done your content, it's been published, that's when the marketing begins.
Yeah, and the lessons that we can all learn from this sort of thing. I mean, again, the question, do you believe in ghosts? Don't they say, you and I do presentations, we do speeches at conferences. One of the best ways to open a speech is to ask a question. Don't go on stage and say, hello, everybody, my name's Roger, and I'm going to talk to you today about marketing, and I've got 25 years of marketing. You go in and hit them with a question. Now, imagine you walk into an auditorium, stand on the stage and say, do you believe in ghosts? You would get a reaction to that, wouldn't you? Mm. And that is the simple genius of this marketing campaign. It leads with that interactive question, and you just can't help but get sucked into answering it.
For me, what The Woman in Black represents is of course, it's true experience to watch the film. Then if you've read the book, you're going to get something additional. Of course, if you've seen the play, as I have, you get... And it's really one of those movies where no matter your age, so long as, of course, you're within the legal age of watching the film, so over the age of 12, according to the DVD cover, you're going to enjoy this, because if you're from the generation you and I have enjoyed Hammer films, then you're thinking, brilliant, I've been waiting. Well, I think the last Hammer movie was done in the late 70s, so that's a long time waiting for a new film production, because of course, we've seen all the others. If you don't know Hammer films at all because you're very young, you'll know Harry Potter. And so on. So there's a hook for everybody, but then all together as a collective, we just essentially fear for the character of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as he's discovering more and more about the curse of the Woman in Black.
And the only problem I have with this movie, Pascal, is the ending.
Which we can't obviously reveal.
Can't obviously reveal. So all I can say is, and this is not, in no way would I discourage people from seeing it, but I don't disagree with the ending of the movie because it wasn't dramatic or it wasn't shocking. It is both those things. But I genuinely have a problem with the end of the movie, which we'll maybe discuss in a separate podcast at a later date. But genuinely, it is a shocking ending to a very scary film, and that's in keeping with the way the film was put together. So that's fine. It's just that for me, I had a few issues with the ending.
No, well, for viewers and listeners, leave your comments in, the usual places in terms of, do you agree with Roger, by the ending? I think I am in agreement with you on that one, certainly. But because the rest of the movie, pretty much 99% of it is so, spot on, it's I forgive, the ending. Although there's many websites writing very lengthy articles about the ending, as we well know. Talking of ending, I think sadly we need to, bring episode 35 to a close. Can I thank you for being such a brilliant co-host as always, and I can I thank you, viewers and listeners, for your support. Once again, please leave your messages, comments, and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards. Bye for now.